Well, welcome back to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast, brought to you in partnership with Odyssey Haven Coaching and Counseling, dedicated to answering the question, is it possible to do ministry without hating it? We have a theory that it just might be. I am Chad Garrison, and I am here with my co-host, my buddy, Brenton Hill. Brenton, how are you?
I'm doing great and glad to be here. And I think that's all I need to say, right?
Yeah, let's keep the riff to a minimal, you know? So today we get to sit down for a conversation with Dr. Daniel Mundt. So you and I, we have known Dan for many years.
Yeah.
And to say that he is a pastor to pastors, that feels a little bit like an understatement. Dan is a mentor, he's a coach, and he really is a champion of countless pastors and ministry leaders from all over. And I believe he really models servant leadership in the many ways that he encourages, he supports, he empowers, and really platforms other leaders. And so I personally, I just want to speak for me, would not be who I am today without his leadership. Would you agree with that, Brenton?
Absolutely. He was one that championed me as I was coming into ministry and continues to speak into my life. And so very much appreciate him.
Yeah. So this conversation, I'm really excited for people to hear this because I think we had an idea kind of going in what we could ask Dan about his a lot of wisdom and just in his tool belt to be able to offer to ministry leaders. And he really starts to speak to approaching conflict within our ministries and how we're never going to be exempt from that. It's always going to come for us. And really gets practical, but I also think he speaks to just really the heart of conflict and how we can approach that and how it actually even starts with us as leaders. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really excited for people to hear our interview. Hey, Brenton, why don't you tell us a little bit about Pastor Daniel Mundt?
All right. Well, Daniel Mundt serves as a national coach for the Foursquare Church. Before accepting the role of coach in 2021, Daniel served as the Heartland District Supervisor. The Heartland District is made up of 6 Midwest states. Those states include Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana, which, by the way, no longer exists, and we touch on that in the interview. Daniel's main responsibilities in the Heartland District is to develop leaders and multiply and transform churches. Likewise, Daniel has served on boards and committees as a lead pastor, a church planner, and support roles within the Foursquare Church. Daniel graduated from Mount Vernon Bible College, which was in Ohio, in 1986 with a BA in theology and completed a master's degree in strategic leadership in 2015. That was at Life Pacific in California. Yeah. Daniel received a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University in Virginia in May of 2020. Daniel and Cindy have been married for 40 years and have been in ministry leadership together for 34 of those years, and they are proud parents of Joshua and Rebecca. In December of 2020, their daughter and son-in-law, Eric, gave them their first grandchild, Indy June Racinos. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Dr. Daniel Mundt.
Well, it is my privilege to welcome Pastor and Dr. Daniel Mundt to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast. Dan, thank you for taking time being here with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So we like to start off with a question that we've asked everybody, and we love to just kind of get a baseline of where we go from here, but also really hear your heart behind this. But what does the word ministry mean to you?
Yeah, it really is an interesting word. When you really dive into the word ministry, it means serving. It means putting people first in ministry. To me, it's about people. It's about empowerment. In fact, this morning for my devotions, I just read Ezekiel 34. And it's one of those chapters of scripture that really it evaluates you, because it starts off with woe to the shepherds. So it's an interesting way to think about ministry, but really ministry is keeping focused on people in need. That would be my quick definition of it. So.
No, that's really good. That's really good. So then how has that shaped in your journey? How has that shaped ministry for you, or even just your own personal journey in ministry leadership?
Yeah, I think, kind of both a personal shaping as well as kind of a ministry mindset. I graduated from college back in 1986, which was a long time ago. And it was really kind of the height of the church growth movement, if you will, or church growth mindset. And really, we were taught to build a big church and build a big ministry. I mean, the people getting platform were the mega churches, and still are to a certain degree. And so I went into it with that mindset, and I quickly found out that how wrong I was. And so really, I had to make a shift from, and it took me some years to do that, building a big ministry to building big people. Mm-hmm. So my idea of ministry and how it shaped me over time was, it's not our job to even build the church. Jesus said, I will build the church. It's our job to do everything we can do to serve people so they become big people. They become complete people, whole people. The word whole and holiness go together. One question that I asked myself, do we use people to build the church, or do we use the church to build people?
Yeah.
That's good.
And when you look at Ephesians 4, it's all about the church building people, not people building the church. Because Jesus said, ultimately, I will build my church. He did call us to make disciples, though. And making disciples is about, helping people reach their fullest, helping people to become whole, helping people to deal with their own pain, helping people to reach their potential and be empowered for the works of service, which is Ephesians 4. So in a nutshell.
I think it's really good. I'm curious, maybe from your perspective, how that looks practically. And you can even talk about maybe how that used to look way back when you said we were taught a certain way to do things, but then also, now as you see, and even especially as we went through this era, post-COVID, whatever you want to call it, of ministry, how that looks and plays out practically.
Yeah, I think how it looks and plays out practically, that's the hard part, the practicality, because we still do Sunday morning services. Mm-hmm. We still work hard on our messages and should. But the ultimate result of what we do, or the ultimate focus, isn't how many did we have on Sunday morning. How good did I preach? How many compliments did I get? Right. Instead, how were people equipped to become their best self? How were people equipped to go into a world post-COVID with all of the uniqueness of post-COVID? How were people equipped to become more self-aware? Here's a big one. How were people equipped to become like Jesus? Because so in a practicality sense, you measure that. That's kind of the framework by which you measure everything you do, not just Sunday morning or Saturday night whenever you have service, but what about everyday interaction with people? How do we make the big people? Just in a simple conversation. How do we, if somebody calls up for counseling, what kind of framework do we walk through when we at least do pastoral counseling? Mm-hmm. What are some things we think through as we're building our weekly, yearly, and 5-month plan? So it's just kind of focusing from, wow, this is about the budget of the church. This is about filling seats in the church, to, wow, this is about helping people become their best self, if you will, and how God has created them to be. So practicality wise, I think it's just shifting the mindset from kind of a church centric to a people centric. And we know that people are the church, but church building and all the things we call success, the metrics that we measure ourselves by. Unfortunately, we still have to live by some of those metrics, because if your attendance goes down, people notice. If your budget goes down, you can't pay bills. Mm-hmm. So we're driven by some of those metrics, but I think ultimately we find our greatest fulfillment in what people are becoming, not how big our church has become.
Yeah, you're hitting on something that's actually kind of even really relevant to me even personally, because I was actually just talking with a missionary who we actually both know, but that we were talking about how you look back on the ministries that you've been a part of before, the things that you've invested and served in, and for me personally, the only things that are left of some of those are the people. In fact, I like to my fun one I like to tell people now is that I served a district in the denomination that doesn't even exist anymore, right? So everything that we built or you did a part of, you can't look back and go, oh, that's still standing, that's there, but it's the people that are there, and that's what is actually the lasting legacy.
Absolutely.
Kind of as we go forward, and I don't know, I just think it's really interesting, because the word we also keep using around here is wholeness. And you did that. You said that earlier as well, that when I think of big people, I think of wholeness and where that complete wholeness comes from. And it's all filtered through, the person of Jesus Christ, right?
It really is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you really measure things, to me, when we really measure things, sometimes in churches we put these big mission statements together, and I'm all for that. But ultimately, my key verse is Galatians 5:22. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control." If we become, to a certain degree, a measure of those things, then to me, and it when it talks about those verses, it talks about we as a church and a community. What do people see of us in this community collectively? Do they think of us as grumpy religious people, or do they think of us as people who really do have joy, not fake, but joy? Even in hard circumstances, do they think of us as people who are loving and our interactions are loving? What about gentleness? All you got to do is evaluate sometimes the church over the last couple of years, just getting on Facebook and Instagram and all of those and say, wow, this doesn't sound like the fruit of the Holy Spirit to me. So those are some gaps in probably all of our lives that we can work on.
No kidding. I think that's
certainly it's true with me. Yeah. It's true with me. So definitely some gaps. So.
For sure. And I'm not saying for sure I agree with you. I'm saying in me as well. We're going to edit that out. Don't worry. We're going to edit that
out. You don't even have to edit it. You know me and I know you. So don't edit it, man. I think vulnerability too, you might be pretty loving, but how are you at faithfulness? You might be pretty loving, but when you interact with people, are you kind? Yeah. The word gentleness doesn't get its due reward in a sense. When we deal with difficult people, are we gentle? So, you don't have to edit all of that, because, boy, I've come face to face with a lot of those things in the last several years in my own personal journey. So,
Dan, as you've led ministries in many different capacities and roles for years. And one of the hard things as a ministry leader in being vulnerable with people is that it puts you out there, and there's things that come with being vulnerable and leading, whatever context you're leading in. As you get vulnerable, you really put yourself in a position to be hurt. And how do you see walking into those places of vulnerability with wisdom?
Yeah, I think being vulnerable and we're walking in transparency, although those are kind of catchwords.
Yeah.
I've seen leaders go too far in vulnerability. I think vulnerability has to do with understanding your crowd.
Yeah.
Understanding who you're being vulnerable with. You don't confess all your sins to everyone.
Right.
That's not even the kind of relationship that God calls us to with everyone. I think as a minister, here's a reality. My name is Reverend Mundt. Chad, your name is Reverend Garrison. Brenton, your name is Reverend Hill. So we have ministerial license. And we have to understand that with ministerial license, there is an ethical standard of relationship that sometimes we cast boundaries out. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes we have to understand the intimacy in relationships and understand that when people look at us, they think of us as Reverend so-and-so. And there is a professional boundary to that Reverend so-and-so. In other words, you don't become openly intimate with everyone in your congregation.
Right.
Intimacy to the furthest degree is reserved for your spouse. Another degree for your family, but you don't let people have that same amount of intimacy. Sure. When brothers are together and they're trusted and you two are good friends, so you can trust each other with more intimate details of your life, but you don't do that with everyone.
Sure.
And so understanding the boundaries of vulnerability, and at the same time, I think you can stand before any crowd and talk about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and talk about some stories where you weren't as kind as you should have been.
Sure.
So that's good boundaries of vulnerability. But if you're going to confess all your sins, you don't stand on Sunday morning and confess all your sins. It really puts you in a place where you violated a boundary where a lot of people in your congregation can't handle that violation of boundary because they don't have the same level of intimacy. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Hope that's clear enough. Yeah. So
I think that's really good. And actually, to kind of segue just a little bit, you had mentioned treating, coming into how you deal with people with gentleness, with kindness, all these things. And I have had the opportunity to serve with you at a denominational leadership level for many years. And I got to personally witness really your conflict resolution skills. And I'm not kidding when I say that you truly are a master at bringing resolution to even the most intense situations. I mean, there's some stuff I walked in like, I could never do his job because I would lose it. I would lose it, right? But for you, I am just curious, what is the starting point for how you view conflict?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a grace that comes on your life when you serve, as all of us do, because the reality is, when you're in the ministry, you will have conflict. That's a promise. And your ministry will be evaluated by how you deal with those conflicts, the process that's used, who wins and who loses, all those kinds of things. So to me, I think the starting point that I've really come to in my life is I deal with conflict best by bringing my best self to the conflict. In other words, if I come into conflict really stressed out and busy, then guess what kind of conflict we're going to have? When I deal with conflict, when I'm in conflict, then it makes it very difficult. When I deal with conflict without seeing through the eyes of Jesus, I think you can't go into conflict with the one idea, and that's this: I'm going to win at all costs.
Right.
Because you will lose. I said recently to somebody, do you want to be right or have a right relationship? Especially with your kids. Do you want to just be right? If you're right all the time, you may be really wrong in the end, because relationships are more important than rightness. And there are times where we have to say, no, this is right and that is wrong. But even in saying that, we can be so self-righteous that we're so wrong in how we dealt with it and how we dealt with the individual. And so I think bringing your best self, I also think self-awareness. is really key. Understanding what you're good at, understanding, for instance, for me, and I'll just be vulnerable with you, I'm a middle child. I was raised in a home that had a lot of conflict. My mom, who is an amazing, godly woman, but she was a peacekeeper, not a peacemaker. Okay. So, when I came into conflict, I found myself as being a peacekeeper and not a peacemaker. And there's a big difference between the two. So I have to be aware that oftentimes in conflict, I have a tendency to take more responsibility than I should. I have a tendency to fall on my own sword, which sometimes it's very right for us to fall on our own sword. We need to lead the way. It's about being vulnerable and humble and all those things. But also you need to be self-aware enough to know that you can't always fall on your own sword, because then there's not true healing. You can't keep the peace in some matters. You got to make the peace. You got to go to the root cause of it. And so being self-aware, I think one of the verses to me that kind of guides, there's a couple of verses of scripture that guide conflict for me. And one is Colossians 3:12 that says, so as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on compassion, put on kindness, put on gentleness, put on humility, put on patience. So there's something about coming into a conflict where we literally have to decide, okay, I'm walking into this, but I'm going to put on humility. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to be aware of it. I'm going to be self-aware of it. That's easier said than done. And sometimes that just comes through a lot of practice and a lot of failure, as well as some successes. But the other thing in conflict, when you're dealing with personal conflict, I think a starting point in a personal conflict is get the log out of your own eye.
Oh, so something easy.
Yeah, something easy.
Good.
Well, yeah, Jesus says that to us. You see the speck in somebody else's eye, but you don't see the log in your own. Ugh. And self-awareness helps us become more aware of that log, because we all have a log in our eye. We don't see our own issues as clearly as we see other people's issues. That's what Jesus was saying. And so coming, and my whole point of that is bringing your best self, coming self-aware, putting on kindness and humility and compassion and those kind of things. I think for me, that's the way, at least I've learned through decades of dealing with conflict. That's the way I've learned. And I'm imperfect at all of those things, just to make that clear.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned a couple of times now being self-aware. What would you say to a leader that's wanting to develop that awareness of themselves and where they're at, and what would be a good starting point for them to start growing in that area of just learning about themselves?
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things that really helped me was I actually got evaluated, emotional equation evaluation. Foursquare actually hired a guy for me to give me a test, and that was really helpful. And it told me some areas that I really was strong in, as well as some areas that I was weak in. One of the things we find with ministers, believe it or not, we can stand on a stage and be so confident. Most ministers are insecure. Many ministers have a low sense of self-esteem. That was true with me. And I had to understand that I took this test and it showed I had a lower sense of self-esteem. Here's what happens when we have a lower sense of self-esteem is we also usually have a lower sense of empathy. And I've seen sometimes in organizations, sometimes in churches, we lack empathy. And in this very narcissistic driven world, in this very selfish driven world, one of the things that goes quickly in a kind of as we grow in selfishness is empathy for others. And so self-awareness is, emotional equation really does kind of show you what you're not as good at, what you're low on. And then that test that I took actually gave some very practical steps for me to grow in that. And it's been a journey, a long journey for me to grow in those things. For instance, empathy. One of the ways we grow in empathy is learning how to say thank you, sending out thank you notes. being able to see other people's needs and stopping and saying, wow, that pain really is real.
Wow.
And, so those are just, I don't know how practical that is, but there's a lot of different ways you can grow in emotional cohesion, grow in self-awareness. For me, a key thing for every leader is to be aware when you walk in a room, how your emotions affect other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's self-awareness, how your emotions affect other people. And when you're self-aware of that, then all of a sudden you can edit along the way. I know people that are very, very forthright and can come across very harsh. They have a good heart and everything. They love Jesus, but they come across in their forthrightness as being harsh. Mm-hmm. Well, in self-awareness, you say, oh, yeah, I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to be real black and white.
Right.
I can edit some things along the way and grow in those. So
I think that's very practical.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot remember. I was trying to remember who I heard this from originally from, but it's something that we've just taken into any season, and that is to actually ask the question of those that you're not only that you're leading, but also that you're serving, of what is it like to be on the other side of me?
Mm-hmm.
And it's
a great question.
It's a scary question sometimes, because you want to talk about vulnerability. It's like, let me go ahead and put myself out there, and I want to actually hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah.
And so I am all about anything that increases our own self-awareness, because for me personally, I find that as I grow in self-awareness, it actually reinforces the humility, because I don't feel like I'm as good as I thought I was before, And so,
Yep.
And whether that's a false humility or not, I think I'm still, there's still the growth point for me. But man, I think that is so practical, especially when you're talking about conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I have a question kind of in that same vein of, especially as you served as a supervisor, you had to wade into a lot of conflict that most of the time was not something that you created. So what is your approach to those type of situations?
Yeah, I mean, there are some situations that you have to be forthright. You have to call, black and white. There are some things that are so clear like that. But even in doing that, you can be gentle how you do it. A driving kind of philosophy or verse that Jesus used was the golden rule: do unto others as you would want them to do to you. And maybe putting yourself in their shoes. This conversation's, it's going to happen. I did this, what would it be like if I did what they did and I was sitting on the other side of the table? Kind of like what you just said. How would I want to be treated? Today is a cancel culture. It's a blame culture. We blame everyone for everything. A culture that really does lack any kind of sensitivity for people. I mean, we've seen that on social media. You can just go say anything about anybody on social media, and if social media says it, it must be true. But the Bible talks about, even when you find there's an interesting verse that talks about finding a brother in sin. And Matthew 18 talks about this: go to him and gently restore if he repents. Gently restore. I'm going to say that again. Gently restore. Yeah. Gentleness is the fruit of the Holy Spirit. So how can we be forthright and gentle? Because I think Jesus was very forthright, and he spoke the truth in love. But that's the key, speaking the truth in love. Too much truth destroys people. Too much love sometimes is not truthful. How can we combine the truth and love, and then gently restore? If someone repents, gently restore. And this cancel culture doesn't restore anything. No. It just cancels. Right. Just cancels. I get mad at you, so I cancel you out of my life. We cancel marriages. We cancel church relationships. We just cancel people when we come in conflict with them. And that doesn't sound like the ways of Christ. In fact, it's not the ways of Christ.
Right.
Let me put it that way. So, so how we treat people, treat people the same way you want to be treated. The other side of that, you ask as a supervisor, how do you go into those conflicts? Another framework of verse that I've kind of used, and that is Micah 6:8, that says, act justly. Mm-hmm. So justice is very, very important. But in acting justly, love mercy. And then it's interesting, it adds this, and walk humbly with your God. Mm-hmm. So do justly, love mercy, and you walk humbly. Because in most situations, without Jesus, we could be in the same boat. And even with Jesus, we need to constantly remind ourselves that, we're sinners on a journey, and thank God for the grace of God, but we can all blow it at times. And so act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly.
Yeah. So, well, we asked the question as a supervisor, how you handle conflict. Does it change as maybe that if you've been part of the conflict or part of the pain in the conflict?
Yeah. I mean, if you cause the pain, which all of us do at times, it's interesting. The prayer of Jabez says, help me to cause no pain. And, but all of us do at times. I've caused pain. Probably you guys have caused pain. And I think learning to listen to somebody else's pain and validate somebody else's pain, and then humbly, take ownership for it. Again, my weakness is I am quick to take responsibility. My mom was like that, as I said. So I have to adjust my responsibility, their responsibility, and understand in criticism, there's always some truth in criticism, even if you don't like it. What can you learn from that criticism? This is what I know. If you're in ministry very long, like a week, you will get criticized.
Yeah.
There will be people who do not like you. As good as you preach and as kind as you are, there will be people. It reminds me of the old woman in a congregation who greeted her new pastor with the words, I was here before you got here, and I will be here when you leave. So, in other words, make me happy.
Right.
So conflict is going to be part of that. And you're going to do some things that cause conflict and cause some pain. And even, one of the things we do as pastors is we change things. Well, understand in every change, there are winners and losers. Let me say that again. In every change, there are winners and losers. How we treat, so many times we platform the winners because they have so many good things to say and they're praising us, but we cancel the losers. How we treat the losers will determine how well that change actually goes.
Oh, that's good.
Because their story matters. Right. And helping people understand, even if I am the cause of your pain, I want you to feel heard. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want you to feel heard. And people feel heard by you practicing listening skills and eye contact and saying you're sorry in a real genuine way, and allowing people to walk through a forgiveness process. We know, thankfully, that when we ask Jesus to forgive us, he forgives us. It's a pretty instant process. We know of people, it takes time, sometimes years. And we need to be patient with people's process. And I'll also say this, I started kind of talking about the continuum of relationships. We are professional clergy because we have REV in front of our names, and it goes from professional clergy all the way down to intimate relationships. One of the ways oftentimes we as leaders don't realize that we cause pain is when we enter into dual relationships. Dual relationships are part of ministry. But dual relationships, see, the professional relationship is I'm here to serve you. You don't have to do anything in return. Dual relationships are I'm here to serve you and I serve you, you serve me. Intimate relationships is we have equal service to each other. And so sometimes dual relationships, there comes expectations. Well, Pastor, I gave you, I did this for you. So then they expect something from you. Those are dual relationships. And it's something we have to be aware of in ministry. And they happen naturally. I have some people that I've ministered with for years that I'm also really good friends with. But you need to understand those dual relationships. I am not only a good friend of yours, but I might be your boss too, or I might be your pastor too, and so that's a dual relationship. And, so we have to understand those roles. Those are good things and bad things. Not against dual relationships. You just have to be aware of the pain that oftentimes they cause. So,
but if you don't mind just holding on that for just a second, because I think it's really interesting. And actually something I've been kind of pondering myself also too is, is it possible to, and it depends on who you talk to, is it possible to serve people in ministry and, like I said, be good friends? And, when it actually comes to the pastoring side of it, and how that responds. And I'm curious, because you said, you have to be aware of that, but what are some things maybe that you've learned to navigate, having the dual relationships? Because it sounds like you think it's fine and it can be done. So what have been some of the best practices for you in being able to actually see that succeed?
Well, I think the best practices for me is I've failed a lot at it. And so, so you have to then understand, what are boundaries, even in dual relationships. What are boundaries? What are lines you won't cross in that dual relationship? So what are boundaries? What are some things we have to be aware of? What are some things those we're in a relationship with need to be aware of? So when I came into ministry, there was a philosophy that pastors can never be friends with their congregants. Never. You keep away from being friends. But now we've gone all the way the other way, where pastors become so intimate with their congregants, not in an unholy way, but just they share everything. They, their life is an open book on the stage. And we've also seen that that's error. That's an error too. And so what are the balance? If you're a counselor, Chad, your wife is a counselor, you kind of have this agreement with those you counsel. This is a professional relationship. You pay me for counseling. I don't expect anything in return. I'm going to ask you to do your homework, all those kind of things, but you don't have to serve me. And sometimes in ministry, we move so far down the continuum to more intimate. And that's where a lot of pastors fail, even sexually fail. So we just got to be aware of, the more intimate we become with people we serve, there grows dual relationships. Same thing as nepotism, or it has kind of the same clause as nepotism, if you will. And so putting those boundaries on to say, hey, I know you and I are good friends, but please also understand I have a responsibility as your shepherd. And here's the lines we will not cross. I'm going to speak the truth in love to you. I expect you to do the same thing to me. But when push comes to shove, your best, your holiness is what I'm more concerned about than our friendship. So understanding those relationships, and it takes time just to realize in dual relationships, there's just so many prongs. I'm not against them. I'm very much for them. I've always had those. But at the same time, there are some power dynamics with dual relationships. I'll give you a real practical one. And I don't know if you wanted me to go this far on this, but you're a pastor of a church, you want to sell a vehicle. You sell it to somebody that's your real good friend in the congregation. That just became a dual relationship. Mm-hmm. What happens 2 weeks later if that car, it goes out, stops running? Now all of a sudden there's conflict, and understand those dual relationships. I have a good friend, Terry Baldwin, who is one of my best friends in life. And when I hired him to join my staff, I said, I want you to understand, Terry, you and I are good friends. That will never change. But now you're coming on staff and it changes our relationship. So I'm not going to sacrifice my friendship for you to be on staff, but I'm now your boss and your friend. And so we have to have clear communication. And if all this fails, I'm still going to be your friend, period.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I may not be able to be your boss. So, and we had that understanding, and it worked very, very well.
You kind of said it a little bit, you alluded to this a little bit earlier when it comes to, there's some truth in all criticism that people, and I think I've also heard you say to me once, you can always learn something about yourself in any conflict. I don't know if you remember what I said, but I know I do because I've thought of this for years. Because my rebuttal sometimes is like, but Dan, some people are just jerks, right? Yep. So how do you respond, or what would you maybe encourage someone to do in response to interacting with people who they really don't want any reconciliation? They just want retribution.
Yeah, that's interesting because we also live in a culture where vengeance is mine, saith me.
That's right.
We all want vengeance. I'm going to go on Facebook if I don't get my way, those kind of things. Sometimes people are just jerks. However, they became jerks probably from a certain amount of pain in their own life.
Yeah.
Or a certain amount of inadequacy in their own life. What is the hole? What is causing them to be such a jerk? There are relationships that you say, listen, all you want is a pound of flesh and I can't help you. And you just got to go be you. And, we have to sever this relationship. But also understand that even in severing a relationship, we have a responsibility to pray for people. We have a responsibility to still be kind to them. But some people will never be satisfied. That they will never get, even if they confront you and they're in a conflict with you and you apologize, it will never be enough, which only speaks of something more painful in their life. All of us are a life, we bring our whole life. We bring all of our pain, our conflicts, all those kind of things to every conflict. And so we have to understand that, there's going to be jerks in our life. Jesus dealt with jerks. And sometimes it was his disciples. And there are times that you just can't work with people. There have been times that I've had to say, listen, this relationship has to end. I will not give you any more of my time because you obviously only want to find criticism in everything I say. And those are tough times, but we have to be honest with them. To me, it's about trust. Jesus said, I will build my church. Jesus said, I'll take care of my people. Jesus said that I will do vengeance, saith the Lord. Sometimes we try to take vengeance on ourselves. And like I said, we go to social media or we slander them or whatever. Ultimately, it's about trusting God because God said, I will do vengeance. Trust me with it. And in his vengeance, thank God, he's always merciful. So I hope that clarifies that. Sometimes there are jerks and we don't need to be their pin cushion.
Yes. Well, no, I think it does. And it's funny as I'm listening to you, I'm like, Chad, you've learned this, it's more of less of just kind of like hearing you kind of pull it apart because you're right. Anymore. And I think the further into ministry that I go, I was just telling Lindsay this just the other day, that all I see is sometimes is the brokenness is what's, so it's not even about me. It's about what's going on in them. And so there goes back to that self-awareness that you're talking about. It's so key. And I love what you said earlier about building up my empathy, because that really does change how I really interact with anybody, good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I'll just say, you guys pastor churches, we're all part of a denomination, same denomination. You can also, if you do some research, you can also find that churches over time, the more institutional they become, the more programmed they become, they lack empathy. That is also true with denominations. It's true with organizations, secular and religious. And when, to me, your empathy is your greatest marketing tool. And when we lose empathy as a church, well, that also becomes, something that you're known for. And to me, when an organization shows a lot of empathy, employees come running to that organization. People want to come to that church. But when we don't, they want to stay away. They can sense it, they can feel it, even if they can't explain it. Empathy is a branding without the artwork,
wow.
if you will.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it really, what I'm even hearing you saying is it actually draws us more back to the heart of Jesus, which is, if we need the reminder, that's why we got into this,
Yep.
the business of ministry, right? And it's to be more and more like him. So, man, that's really good.
Yeah, in Matthew 9, I think it's 9:36, Jesus doesn't look at the crowds and say, oh, man, who's going to feed them? Oh, man. He looks at them and his heart breaks and he's moved with compassion because he says that they are sheep without shepherds. And that's a constant reminder as we look over our cities, over our congregation, over the people we serve, over the people who don't like us. Let's be moved with compassion because they're sheep without a shepherd.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. When I asked the question, how have you learned to do ministry without hating it? What is your response?
I'm still learning. But I think my response would be keep the main thing. And the main thing is people. And also temper your expectations. People aren't going to, it's always interesting when a pastor presents a vision and people don't get excited over it. And then they go through 3 weeks of depression after that. And I always say, it's not their vision, it's yours. And so your job is to create passion for that vision. And so measuring your expectations, understanding people are flawed like you, understanding that I'm not here to build a big church. I remember when I first went to Rochester, Indiana, very small congregation, I said to Jesus, I'm going to give you 9 months. And if we're not running a certain amount by 9 months, I'm out of here. And Jesus said, I think I'm the one that called you. You don't call me.
Yes.
and just keeping the right thing. The thing of focus on people and understanding people are in pain like never before. People have always been in pain, but boy, we see it this post-pandemic, if you will. We see some real holes and maybe even the ministries we had before. Things have changed, and so keeping a focus, keeping the right thing, and then also having a relationship with Jesus. I know we all work on that, and we all have highs and lows, but without Jesus as the center of your life, your personal life, I think you're going to hate ministry. I think you're just going to hate it. And if we don't keep Jesus at the center of it all. So.
That's, it's funny. I'm just thinking that's so simple, yet that is it. That's what it all
comes down to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, if I'm overthinking just even that very, very simple truth. Yeah.
And that has some practicality to it. I mean, that has something about your daily walk. It has, and we are all on a journey to try to figure that out. But keeping Jesus as the center. Jesus, I do this for you. And then understand you got to walk in the grace he's given you. Mm-hmm. And Jesus gives us incredible grace to do this job. Without it, none of us would stand.
Right.
Yep.
So, yeah,
that's right.
We say it at around here. It's mostly like we want to look more like Jesus at the end of our ministry than we did when we started it. And
there you go.
Oftentimes we see that flip flopped. You get grumpier and more bitter as ministry goes on, and that's so our goal point that we set out, the point we aim for is we want to look more like him than when we started.
Yep. Yep, there it is. That's what it's all about. Looking like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's all about. So,
yeah. Well, Dan, I just want to say again, thank you for your time. This has been really refreshing and a great reminder for me. I don't want to speak for Brenton, but he's doing a lot of nodding over there. So I think we're all on the same page. So I just want to say once again, thank you just for continuing to be a model. I know maybe you don't feel like that all the time, but it really just an inspiring way of approaching ministry and just remembering why we do this and what's the most important thing. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Love you guys, and I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We love you too.
Yes.
Well, blessing. And you can either keep that or edit it.
Oh, I'm going to keep it. I want other people to know.
It. We want that forever.
All right, man.
Forever.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay. All right. Blessings.
Yep. Thanks,
Talk to you
Dan.
later.
Bye. Bye.
Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Ministry Without Hating It. We hope it's helped you take a step further to loving what you do more through the wisdom of others. We want to again thank today's guest, Dr. Daniel Mundt. Really great stuff. Just making people the focus of all we do and remembering that we're doing this for Jesus and it's by his power that we're able to see really just reconciliation come from even maybe some of the craziest things. So really great stuff. If you'd like to connect further with Dan, you can email him or connect with him via Instagram. We've listed that in the show notes if you want to get to him directly. And as always, you can find more episodes and resources at withouthatingit.com. And please don't forget to subscribe to Ministry Without Hating It wherever it is that you get your podcasts so you don't miss out on our future episode releases. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you next time.